Hello, in this video we're going to talk about value returning functions, and specifically I'm going to show you how to write your own value returning functions in Python. Now when I speak of value returning functions, I'm talking about functions that perform some operation and then they return a value back to the statement that called the function. This is something that you're actually familiar with because there are a number of value returning functions in the Python standard library, and up to this point you've used quite a few of them. For example, there's the input function, which reads input from the keyboard and then it returns that piece of data that was entered at the keyboard. Now here on the screen we have an example of a statement that calls the input function. So this input function will read whatever data the user types at the keyboard, and then it will return that piece of data. When a value returning function returns a piece of data, we typically want to do something with that return value, and in this statement we are assigning the return value to the name variable. So the input function reads input at the keyboard, it returns that piece of data, and that piece of data is assigned to the name variable. Okay, let's look at another example. You've used the data conversion functions such as the int function. Well, in this code, first we create a variable named real num and we assign it the value 2.5, and then in this statement we are calling the int function, passing real num as an argument. Now the int function will convert this value to an integer, and it returns that value, which is assigned to the whole num variable. So after this statement executes, whole num will be assigned the value 2.0. Here's another example. The random.randint function generates a random number, and in this case we've passed these two arguments, so it's going to generate a random number in the range of 1 to 100, and it will return that number, which in this statement will be assigned to the number variable. Now you can easily write your own functions in Python that return values, and the main difference between just a regular simple function that does not return a value and a value returning function is that the value returning function has a return statement. Now the return statement, and here we have on the screen we have an example of a value returning function. I'm going to go over this in just a moment, but the return statement does two things. When it executes, it causes the function to terminate, and then it sends the value of an expression back to the statement that called the function. So you simply write the word return followed by some expression or some value, and that expression or value is what is sent back to the statement that called the function. So let's look at this function that we have here. The name of the function is sum, and it has two parameters, num1 and num2. So when you call this function, you're going to pass two arguments. Here in this statement, we assign the result variable the value of num1 plus num2, and then we simply return the result variable. So when you call this function, you pass two arguments, two numbers, and it returns the sum of those two numbers. So how might we call this function in a program? Well, here's an example where we have a main function, and you can see here we have the statement that that calls the main function. When we execute the program, this calls the main function, and then the main function performs these two assignments, a equal 10, b equal 20. And then we have this statement. This is where we call the sum function. Total equals sum, and we're passing a and b as arguments. So when this statement executes, the sum function is called, and the values of a and b are passed as arguments into the num1 and num2 parameters. So that means that in the sum function, num1 is assigned 10 and num2 is assigned 20. Here in this statement, result equals num1 plus num2. Well, result equals 10 plus 20, so that assigns the value 30 to result. And then we hit this return statement. So the return statement says, okay, terminate the function and send the value of the result variable back to the statement that called the function. So the value 30 is returned back to this statement, and you can see here it gets assigned to the total variable here in the main function, and then we have this statement that calls the print function, printing the value of the total variable. So we'll get the number 30 displayed on the screen. Well, let's switch over to our idle environment where I've got this program already entered into the editor, and let's run it and let's see if that's what happens. Okay, so here's the code. This is the same as we just looked at, so I'm going to execute this, and sure enough, the print statement here, the print function, prints the value 30.